demons are really, really pitiful. They're kind of pathetic, constantly miserable. They're evil. No sympathy there. But without the fear and the angst and the dark cloud, the stuff they try to slather you in or get you to agree to or attach to, they're really, really weak, right? Like they're like taking out the trash, or like they're like gnats. They're not nearly as strong as they want you to think.
Oh no, the amount of times that I've had sleep paralysis or something,
Yeah.
and I just finally get my body to work and I just say the name of Jesus and they're gone.
When we talk about all this stuff, when we talk about the dark, when we talk about the demonic, like I really, really do just want to emphasize that God is so much more powerful than them, and they're not nearly as strong as they want you to believe. Like whatever else you think or believe about like everything we just said, the enemy, the dark, is not as powerful, nor as looming, nor as like nowhere near as unified as they want you to think. I think a lot of the time we can tend to fall into, oh, it's the forces of heaven versus the forces of hell. And there's definitely like a push from the occultists to make it seem like they're equal forces,
Right.
right? When in reality, no. God is so much more powerful. Everything about the kingdom of God is alive, is life-giving, is generative in a way that the kingdom of death, the kingdom of the enemy, the kingdom of darkness cannot touch.
What's up, man?
Not much. What's up with you?
Not too much. Welcome back to the podcast, guys. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi.
Isaac, we're gonna talk today about the Deuteronomy 32 worldview as Micheal Hieser and Doug Van Dorn and those around that circle sort of talk about it. I kind of wanted to go into this because I think it paints a really good picture for some of how we're going to look at different things theologically, what's happening in the world even today. I think it paints a really good picture, and I think it's super important to comprehend the unseen realm, as Dr. Heiser calls it, because I really do believe that the church has done a poor job of exploring what the unseen realm is. Either they're like super Pentecostal and they don't they believe in the spirit, but they don't quite comprehend what's going on, or they're very cessationist and don't believe any of it, and act as though none of it is matters, I guess. And so my thought was that we would go through Heiser's 32 worldview, Deuteronomy 32 worldview, and kind of explain this stuff because I think it's important. I mean, you as somebody who sees in the spirit.
Yeah, it's wildly important and it's wildly real. And I think that a lot of people don't realize the extent and the depth to which God has really instilled a lot of care in how he made creation, in the systems and the processes that are running behind the scenes, behind the veil, and in how these things affect our lives and the approach that we take to our worldview, to how we look at the world, how we look at the universe, and how we look at the spiritual entities that intersect with our reality, with our world, is really, really important because we have a sort of we're all products of the Enlightenment, right? The Western sort of Enlightenment and the Western sort of thinking, this sort of either or black and white binary logical perspective. And we've lost this sort of understanding that the ancients had, that the world was alive. The world is
Much more complex.
intangible, like filled with all these intangible spirits with a tangible impact in a way.
Yep.
And so we've lost that. And I think in that regard, we've lost a lot of other things too, tied into that.
So most of this comes from what would be called Second Temple ideologies. That means pre-Jesus up until about 70 AD, to be honest, because that's when the temple fell. And so these are things that the Jews believed until about the second century, and the Christians believed until about the fourth century, if I remember correctly. And part of the reason why Christians stopped believing in a lot of this supernatural stuff is because Augustine, as popular as he was, he said himself, I believe it was in his Confessions or whatever, but
Mm,
he wished that he had learned Hebrew, that he regretted that he never learned it. Now he knew Greek, so he understood what was going on in the
mm,
Septuagint, but you don't get the nuance and you don't get the clarity that you get when you actually break down the Old Testament with the Hebrew and the Hebrew thought. And so at some of these points, especially when it comes to Genesis 6, he basically stated that like I can't believe it, so I won't believe it.
mm.
And that's a problem because, I mean, Christians up until his day, and even like other subsects, outside of
Mhm.
the realm that he was influencing in or
Mhm.
whatever, they all believed this stuff, but eventually Christians just became sort of naturalized and
Uh,
in a
yeah,
way that's very on par with our almost evolutionistic culture that has been built.
that that makes me think of like a naturalized citizen. That makes me think of that because we're meant to be strangers and wanderers and vagabonds in this world, meant to understand and embrace the reality that we belong to God,
Hmm.
right? That all of this ultimately is orchestrated to follows his plan, right?
Yep.
He's in charge, and there's room for nuance, and there's room for flats, and room for like will and that.
Yeah.
Human choices is what I mean. But I think in a lot of ways we've become too fixated here in
Hmm.
this world, and that goes beyond just the sort of like the topic of this sort of worldview,
Yeah.
into a lot of other things that I'm sure you will talk about at
Oh,
some
for
point or
sure.
another.
For sure. I mean, there's this idea that in the Western mind, we are bodies that happen to have a spirit and a soul.
Mhm,
Whereas in sort of Eastern philosophies, and especially in the Hebraic mind, we are a spirit and a soul that happens to inhabit a body.
mhm,
And so that's a completely different lens to look at things through. And I think the other reason why a lot of this is sort of rejected in today's culture is because there's a misunderstanding of some of the words that are being used.
mhm,
Um, so when people start to say that, hey, there's these other gods,
mhm,
well, in our Christian mindset in the West, it's that
mhm,
like, oh, well, those gods didn't exist. They're not real things. Like the devil's out there somewhere, but there's no real gods.
mhm.
Whereas this mindset, the Hebraic mindset, was that the other gods were real entities. They just weren't on par with Yahweh. Okay.
Lesser G gods.
Yes, and that's honestly a concept that we embrace. Like there's this lesser G gods thing, but we think of it like idols that we think of today, like, oh, the
Yeah.
Super Bowl is an idol. It's like that's not what we mean, but
Well, Super
um
Bowl is some other thing. I don't know what that is, but
yeah, but the idea is that there were these other entities that did
Mhm,
have a much more prevalent grip on the world, and we're going to explore why here shortly.
mhm.
But they had a much more prevalent grip on the world until Jesus died on the cross. And it says, like Paul says, that these powers were disarmed.
Yeah.
We accept that there are powers out there that are against God, that are against us, but we, for some reason, get bound up by this wording that says that these Elohim or B'nai Elohim, I believe is how
Mhm.
you I could be pronouncing that wrong, but that these are gods, or there's also this offense that like angels could fall, which is weird because Lucifer was an angel that fell, and
Pretty explicitly he fell, yeah.
yeah, but for some reason the way in which we talk about it here, it might step on some toes. But we're gonna start with just the Bible and sort of explain why this is very biblical. And
Mhm,
then we can start to touch on why the Book of Enoch and things like that matter as far as context goes.
mhm,
Now, we're not going to say that it is on par with the Bible. That's just not the case, but it is important for context.
mhm,
So, some of the ways that we can start to see this unravel is. the what's called the three falls. So we all know about the fall in Genesis 3, where the
Yeah.
serpent tricks Eve and Adam and Eve into eating the apple. That is the first fall. And there's a curse that happens there, and it is that your seed, talking to Eve, and then the other seed, talking to the serpent, which
Mhm.
is also possibly a the word is potentially talking about a seraph.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on there that I'm not 100% sure are like,
For me, I think like when people are like, "Oh, the serpent," they think and they tend to think of like a literal serpent. I'm
uh,
like, no, I think it's more of a serpentine being, but it's an Elohim. Which let me
yeah,
define Elohim real quick because we've said
yes.
that a couple times. People tend to think of Elohim as Yahweh himself. However, that's not
Elohim,
El Elohim, I
yes.
believe, is the the designation for Yahweh as the Lord of Lords, right?
Mhm.
And that's another thing is Lord of Lords literally means God of gods. Like that's
It
basically what it
implies in and
implies.
of itself that there are other gods, other lords, lesser lords, of which God is the greatest of.
Yes.
And I mean, we see that in different, various and sundry different poetic names for him. Like one of his names is like Father of Lights, right?
Yep.
He made this reality full of spirits, full of
hmm And the stars is
yes.
a representation of the angelic,
Mhm.
these Elohim. Yeah.
Yeah. And he made this reality full of spirits, full of these entities that, you know, we would call some of them gods, you
Yep.
know. This is how we get like a lot of the gods later among the nations. I think we'll get to that though. And it's just to say, like, God is a lot bigger than we think,
Oh yeah.
a lot bigger than we realize.
And the spiritual realm's way more complicated
Spiritual
than we think.
realm, oh, it's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's it's big and it's a lot older than we think, and there's a lot more going on there than I think most of us ever realize. Most people ever experience. So
Yep.
it is easy to sort of tuck away. I do think the context is important because it points to God, different qualities and aspects of God, right? He's the Father of lights, He's the Lord of lords, He's the King of kings. That's not just earthly kings. I've heard that
Yes.
argument, that that's earthly kings,
hmm
earthly lords. And that is true as well because all authority proceeds from God.
Yep.
But it really is, I think, originally pointing to this bigger picture, this grander sort of reality, more stuff going on, you
Yes.
know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The earth is basically just it's like we pull a lot from the heavens and we don't even realize it.
Yeah.
So, but to mentioning that sort of enmity between seeds, a lot of people just
Mhm.
take it as
Yes.
like, oh well, like Satan ends up
Mm.
with just a spiritual seed, whereas
Mm.
Eve ends up with a physical seed in
Mm.
Jesus, but it's also spiritual seed in the Christians and whatnot. And it's like, okay, that's inconsistent. It doesn't actually make sense with the text. Um, Otherwise, there would be a separation, or one, or if it was true of one, it would be true of both,
Mm.
right? So there wouldn't be a physical seed if it was meant to only be spiritual seed. It's inconsistent. It doesn't actually make sense to make
Yeah.
that claim. And that's as far as I think we need to go with that. But
Mhm.
there is this realization that hey, there's a seed. The way that we reconcile that though is in the Western Church we don't believe this part, right?
Mhm.
Genesis 6 is considered the second fall. Okay.
Mhm.
And what it says is that when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any that they chose. And the Lord said, "My spirit shall not abide with man forever, for he is flesh; his days shall be 120 years." The
Mhm.
Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also after, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man and bore children to them. These were the mighty men of who were of old, the men of renown. Now,
Hmm.
the justification that Augustine made was that these sons of God must have been sons of Cain,
Hmm.
and that the daughters of men must have been the daughters of Abel. But that doesn't make any sense
Mm.
because if Cain was rejected
No.
by God,
Yeah.
then why would he be the one considered a son of God?
Hmm.
And if it was differentiating between two lineages, okay.
Hmm.
Now the word there is Benea Elohim.
Hmm.
Everywhere in the Bible that it is mentioned, it is always talking about angels.
Yes.
It cannot be that all of a sudden in this one verse, conveniently, it's
Hmm.
talking about earthly people. That's inconsistent. That's bad theology. It's bad study. It just makes zero sense.
Hmm.
Um, we see throughout all sorts of Second Temporal literature that the Jewish mind, the Hebraic mind, believed that these were the angels that came down and copulated with women
Hmm.
and created these giants that
Yes.
roamed the earth.
Yeah.
Okay, so it would be inconsistent to say, and it mentions that the Nephilim were there before and after. Um, that comes into the third fall, which
Hmm.
is Tower of Babel, Nimrod.
Yeah.
Um, it says that he became a Gibor or a Gibberine, which basically is giant.
Hmm.
There's ideas that it could have been through occultic practices. It could have also been through the same provoking angels to come down,
Yeah.
but it also could have been through epigenetics, through Ham's line, that he became a quote unquote Nephilim, which later became Rephaim in the land of Canaan and all this other stuff, right?
Yeah.
Um, all that to say, the sons of God thing, it means the angelic, it means the watchers.
Hmm.
Um, and it would be incoherent to say otherwise.
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. So we'll go from Genesis to Deuteronomy 32, which is what this worldview is based on, essentially. And we'll start in let's see, 7, and we'll do 8 and 9. Okay. So it says, "Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind. He fixed their borders, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God." There that is
Hmm.
again. "According to the Lord's portion in his people, Jacob, his heritage,
Yes.
his allotted heritage."
Yes.
Okay, so there's a couple things here. First of all, we're talking about two different Yahwehs here. We
Hmm.
have to be because of the fact that uh, the Father doesn't inherit,
Hmm.
the Son does. So we're talking about Jesus,
Yes.
just pre-incarnate Jesus
An Old
inheriting
Testament picture of Jesus before he came as Jesus.
inheriting Jacob or
Hmm.
Israel, right?
I mean, it's also, I think, prophetic
Yes.
foreshadowing to, anyway, yes.
Correct. But it's if the Lord's inheritance
Hmm.
is Jacob, but the other basically the other nations are disinherited and given to
Yes.
these other sons of God, then what do we do with that?
Well, that's the splitting at the Tower of Babel.
Yes,
That's when
Yahweh
um,
disinherits.
they were such an affront to Yahweh, and they were trying to um, build a tower into the heavens, such that what's really going on there is, by my sort of understanding,
Hmm.
by sort of what I've sensed and what I've read into and studied, is that they were trying to enter into the second heavens, where the courts of the Elohim were.
Yeah, or bring them back
Right.
down, yeah,
Yeah.
through
So,
occultism.
and real quick, like first heaven, that's just the stars, our galaxies, our universe, this tangible realm. Heaven's in the sense of like the night sky, the stars, the sun, all that. Second heaven is where Whole lot of stuff happens, but among in the second heaven, there are courts, right? You see this actually in the book of Job a little bit, where Satan approaches God, they make a wager. That's in the beginning, very beginning of the book of Job. That's Satan coming with a sort of legal case
Hmm.
almost against Job in the second heaven.
Yeah.
Because Satan, Lucifer, was cast out of the third heaven, which is the throne room.
Hmm.
It's the throne room. It's where we go for a time,
Hmm.
until the whole second coming, all that, recreation of the earth, all that,
Yeah.
until then, that's third heaven is the abode of God. Second heaven is sort of the courtrooms for the different spirits, entities, and Elohim.
Okay. Interesting.
It's a, I think there's other stuff going on there, but that's a little bit beyond the scope of
Yeah.
this.
There's also an idea that that particular Satan may not be the serpent or Lucifer.
Yeah,
And
that's the other.
yeah.
Yeah, that we'll have to do something on the Book of Job at some point. Book of
Yeah.
Job is really interesting.
I haven't
It's not
really
interesting when
deep
you're a
dived it.
kid, but like,
Oh yeah.
or when you're a teenager or a kid, but it gets really interesting as
Hmm.
you become an adult.
Yeah, for sure.
But anyway, like in the beginning of the book of Job, right? Satan comes to accuse Job to God. Well, that's in the second heaven.
Hmm.
Lucifer was cast out of the third heaven,
Yeah.
not allowed back in there anymore. He is still allowed in the courtrooms, right? And that's sort of in line, I think, with our understanding and our sort of like perception of Satan, of the devil.
Hmm.
He's legalistic. He accuses,
Yep. Yep.
he slanders. He comes with legal right or trying to subvert legal right, in
Hmm.
the spiritual sense, right? That's all going on second heaven.
Yeah.
What they were trying to do at Babel was they were trying to open up portals to these other places.
Yes.
They were trying to bring in these other entities. They were trying to basically, in a very like dark way, subvert or get around God
Yep.
and go to these other things, you know?
Yeah, they were trying to basically bring back what would have been at that time the old gods from before the flood.
Yeah.
These sons of God that came down, copulated with women, and
Yes.
according to the Book of Enoch, taught them mysteries, taught them very like a ton of different things.
Well, and that I think there's also worth making a difference between, there are demons, which are the disincorporated, disembodied spirits of the Nephilim,
Yeah, I was gonna get
half
here.
human, half giant,
Yeah,
or half human, half angel. Then there are the fallen angels, and then there are there are the spirits, the gods that are have authority and territory and
this is gonna
power
get into the.
over
Yep.
different sort of like natural functions of
Yes.
the world.
So the Deuteronomy 32 ones.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that we don't tend to believe that in the Western Church very much. We think that we call everything that's evil a demon. The Hebraic thought in the Second Temple period was that these Nephilim, because they were products of both heavenly and human biologics or however you want to say it. And that's another thing is people always are like, well, how could angels, whatever? It's like, okay, first of all, they can eat with us. They can wrestle with us. They can do all
More
these things
than
with us
once,
in
they
the
show
Old
up in
Testament.
physical, tangible ways.
Yes.
And incidentally, this might be actually getting a little bit off track. You might have to edit this out. But the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which was the one we weren't supposed to eat out of,
Uh-huh.
that was actually a portal for the spiritual beings to interface with this reality and learn from humanity.
I'm gonna let that just sit and simmer and let people wonder what the heck you're talking about on that, and maybe we'll come back to it on another podcast or something. Because
Gotcha.
that seems
Let's That's its own thing. Anyway, um,
wet your whistle, so to speak. But no, they interacted physically in all these other ways. I think the scripture that they try to take to make the case that they couldn't is when Jesus said that that angels aren't given in marriage, but that doesn't mean that they can't reproduce. Like they may not have marriage institution the way that we do, but that doesn't mean they can't copulate. And if they lusted after women and then came down, then
Yeah.
they had the biology to do something about it.
I yes, and I sort of like two sort of fleeting thoughts on that verse, and then I can also sort of speak a little bit
On
from my
experiential stuff.
experiences, yeah, as a seer with the angels. So on that verse, the angels are neither given in marriage or nor you know how it goes.
Hmm.
We gotta think in the context of at that time, like Jesus's response at that moment. He was talking to the Sadducees, who
Hmm.
they were kind of like, the agnostics or the atheists, or I'm not sure that's the right word. They were the people that didn't believe in a physical resurrection, right?
Naturalists.
Yeah, they were the naturalists.
Because they
Somewhat,
didn't believe much about angels either, right?
no, that's what Jesus was speaking to. He's like, your very question is wrong. He said something to that effect,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
paraphrasing.
Oh, yeah.
And then he addresses like the content of the question because the whole way that was framed up was in I believe the Levitical law.
Hmm.
They were really concerned with names and genealogies and having your bloodline continue.
Yep.
And so if your brother had been married but hadn't had any kids and died, it fell to the next brother to marry the widow and raise up children after him so that
They could take on the
um,
name of the.
they can continue the name. They can continue the lineage so that your brother's name wasn't lost,
Yes.
you know? And that's the way that, the Sadducees are asking. They present this question, this whole story of this really unfortunate family, this really unfortunate widow of like,
Yeah, like multiple husbands
yeah,
because of that,
because of that whole
of
rule,
different
they all
brothers.
died.
Yep.
These seven brothers, I think, and then the widow also died childless.
Hmm.
Terrible circumstance, terrible situation, first off. But secondly, it's speaking to that sort of like that sort of ruling, that sort of law, in case anyone doesn't know.
Yeah.
And what they're really trying to get at, they're actually really contesting the resurrection in the first place.
Yeah.
They're coming with this naturalistic sort of perspective. And Jesus himself says something to the effect of like, you're asking wrong. You're wrong in the asking in the first place. Like in
Hmm.
this sort of like you have the wrong view in the first place. And then he goes on to answer the question and he says something to the effect of translations will vary and I'm gonna just paraphrase. He says something to the effect of like, don't you know in the resurrection
The
something like,
angels won't be or are not given in marriage or something like that.
yeah, neither give or given in marriage, something along those lines.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to address sort of
He just kind of switches
yeah,
topics from there, if I remember right. But yeah,
yeah.
so
There's there's something with that in terms of that was speaking very specifically to angels are not given in marriage in the sense that we have marriage as an institution here, right? Because way back in the day, right, it was this whole cultural practice, especially back then, Hebrew people, like you would have married for economic reasons, social reasons, political reasons. Women didn't really have rights, they were considered
hmm.
items, property, to be given or to have. I looked at the original language of this passage the other day, and the whole like given in marriage,
Hmm.
or something like that. The whole language there in the original sort of original terms
I think in
does
Greek.
carry a lot of connotations with like possession,
Yeah.
taking hold of, taking into your hand, right? And so what Jesus is speaking to is that in an odd sort of way, he's
People don't
actually
have possessions.
well, he's wow, yeah, funnily enough, women aren't possessions. I don't know, like funnily enough, Jesus is a feminist?
Not quite.
No, no, I'm rather that anyway. Um
Very pro women.
yeah, he is. And that would have
Feminist is just a loaded term.
oh yeah. Don't
Very,
crucify me on this
very
joke,
pro women.
but Um, and that would have been wildly countercultural at the time.
Yes.
But yeah, he's speaking as far as the angels go, like he's addressing several things at once with his response. As far as the angels go, there aren't these power plays between them,
Hmm.
not the loyal ones at least. There isn't this sort of like institution as we have it.
Right.
It's all about Jesus, right?
That makes sense.
And so even today, like marriage is an institution with a lot of like, a lot of social and economic
Gain.
impact,
Yep.
gain, whole industry about it or around it. And even now, even today, like speaking to humans, like we still relating between men and women is still fraught sometimes. And that goes back to, the
Yep.
curse that you
Yep.
mentioned earlier, right?
Yep.
One of the major parts of that curse was relational
Yeah.
and landed on men and women the way that we relate.
Between Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the angels, they do have something akin to marriage or something akin to union. I'm going to agitate people with that. I'm gonna agitate people with that, but
Go for it.
they do have something like unto that. They have likes, they have dislikes, they have the capacity to feel love. They definitely have the capacity to reproduce. That's how we got the Nephilim and got into this mess in the first place, partly.
Yeah.
So
I heard Micah talk about how he's seen baby angels before.
yeah, there absolutely are.
Yeah.
And in that regard, like who knows, like angel time outside of realms, like how much those,
Mm,
like how old the little angels really were, in human terms.
right.
One of my angels says she's 28, but like, is that in human terms or is that closer to 28,000 if we were to
A,
like transliterate it
a
over?
day
But
is as a,
yeah,
which
as
that's a fun rabbit hole.
that's something.
Anyway.
Anyway, point is like, and this is where I'm drawing on my experience as a seer. Angels do have personality,
Mhm.
right? They're different sort of substance from us. They're different and they don't have the same sort of like blessing that we have in terms of they don't have the same sort of access to God that we have, right? We're the image bearers.
Hmm.
They still glorify God and they still have personality because ultimately all creation glorifies God.
Yep.
And so the, I don't know how else to say it, but they do have loves and they do have like the capacity to be united in something that isn't the institution of marriage as we know it now, but
A
is,
heavenly version.
yeah, something else.
Yeah. Yep.
And there's mystery on that. There's mystery on that. I'm willing to be potentially wrong on that, but there is a great deal of mystery. And I think that's also part of this whole the Deuteronomy 32 worldview, the Hebrew worldview, is they had an appreciation for mystery.
Yep.
They had an appreciation for wonder, that we've
Yep.
kind of lost in our very like very secular, very
Very Greek
logical, increasingly cynical, very Greek sort of like
concept.
age,
Yep.
And I guess the only other thing I'd like to add to that is that all of God's kingdom is generative, all life-giving, right?
Hmm.
The kingdom of hell, the kingdom of darkness is death.
Yes.
And that's ultimately where sin leads you. Sin is falling short. Sin is separation from God. That's ultimately where it leads you, where it leaves you, and ultimately the fate of all the demons and the fallen angels and the fallen Elohim in hell is death is their end. And that has a lot of implications
Yeah.
and works out a lot of different ways in the
Yep.
spirit. Like there's a lot to unpack there. But all of God's kingdom is generative
Yeah.
and life-giving. So like
Makes sense.
the angels, can absolutely
Reproduce.
yeah.
Yeah.
That also has a lot of implications and a
But
lot to unpack. But
but
what I'm
we
saying,
don't have to comprehend
let's get back
everything
on
about
track here.
yeah, we don't have to comprehend everything in the spirit. But
No, yes.
the Bible doesn't it doesn't remove that possibility. is what we're getting at. The
Yeah.
the Bible does not remove that possibility, and what he sees in the Spirit is it's additional to, but
Hmm.
we're not countering the Bible in any way. We're actually just walking down what it says
Hmm.
and figuring out what it actually said, not what we think it says in English, but what it
Yeah.
actually said in the original languages, and how the Hebrew mind would have interpreted all these things and stuff like that. But
Yes.
all I'd say when he says Elohim and I say Elohim, we're saying the same thing. It's just different ways of saying it.
Okay.
By the way,
Wow. Okay. Wow.
I just
Okay.
figured that could be confusing for people. But it's
Okay.
all good. I just
I'm
always heard it
sorry. I'm
Elohim.
not a
Dude, it's fine. It's fine.
graduated biblical scholar. I'm sorry. I'm not
Me
Dr.
neither.
Micheal Hieser.
Anyway, back to the Deuteronomy 32 piece.
Yeah. Thank you for getting us back on track.
Yeah, no problem. One of the things uh, to note is that when this is written, Moses was talking about a time before.
Hmm.
So this is obviously pre-Moses, and he's talking about
Hmm.
remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. So after your
Yes.
fathers, and he or ask your father, and he will show you your elders, and they will tell you. Okay, so this was something that was passed down for a long time, and
Yes.
what they're referencing here about the dividing. Let's see. It says, and when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance.
Hmm.
When he divided mankind, he fixed their borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God.
Yes.
That's referencing basically the table of nations that I believe is written out in Genesis. I don't remember. I didn't write that part down. But it
Mm.
talks about the 70 sons of God because there's 70 nations named or something like that. And I believe
At that time.
this is
Yeah.
right after Nimrod and the Tower of Babel.
Yes.
Um, so oh, I guess it is Genesis 10, I believe. It's the 70 sons of God according to the tables of nations.
Hmm.
And actually, Plato references this. He actually references the Bible on this
Hmm.
in one of his works. He's talking about how he basically plagiarizes Moses and then says that Greece got a couple of specific deities. I don't remember which ones he names,
Hmm.
but because they are the wise ones or something like that. That's actually a pretty interesting little tidbit there. But even he was like,
There's
yeah,
something to that.
The Bible's right about
Yeah.
this dividing of nations unto different gods. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's definitely um with the ancient peoples, I think they were more open to that. Even the Greeks that were more logical and sort of binary, at least that at one point, it was very much a sort of understanding, I think, for most of human history that the world was full of like unseen spirits,
hmm
and all sorts of different causes for different things, and now we're just supernaturalists.
hmm
I mean, this sounds something in that.
yeah. So let's see here. I wrote down a ton of notes, so I won't touch everything here, I don't think.
No, go for it. Swing for the fences.
Well, it's more of that I'd have to flip through different stuff, and I'm trying to remember the context of some of it. So that
Oh,
to be
cool.
fair,
We were prepared.
um, yeah, I mean, I'm prepared enough. It's just been a little while since I took these notes.
I,
But let's see.
I want to point out before we started recording, I asked, how do you want to go through this? How do you want to break
I
this
said,
down? And
listen,
you're like, "Oh, I'll tell you." And then we just started recording.
my bad. I said I've got notes, and then I don't know. Anyway, we're fine. Dude. I just make like a woman's eyeliner and wing it sometimes. It's fine. Anyhow, let's see.
I'll just understand your notes telepathically
Yeah,
next time.
no, you're good. You're good. Listen, just follow my lead, guy. Deuteronomy 4:19 through 20 talks about the sun, the moon, and the stars and the
Mm,
host of heavens. Those allotted to the people under heaven.
mm.
That's also referencing this whole inheritance of the nations
Yeah.
to different sons of God. And mind you, these sons of God are different than the ones that fell in Genesis 6. Okay, so Genesis
So
6, sons of
Genesis
God.
6, I think most likely the Watchers.
Yes. So those were referenced in the Book of Enoch. We'll get to that later. The Deuteronomy 32 sons of God.
Yes,
These
this is the distinction I wanted to make earlier.
the idea is that, and I may not get this completely right, but when Heiser explained it, it's that at one point in the Bible it references them, and actually I think in this one, as if they were meant to be regents for the Lord,
Yeah,
that they weren't meant to lead men astray. They were actually meant to, they were meant to lead them unto
yeah,
godliness and eventually back to the Lord. But then
yes.
they failed to do that. And we see that happen in Psalm 82. I'll go ahead and turn there if you want to if you had something to say on that.
Yeah, I think God is incredibly collaborative, right? Even, even just within God himself, right? We have the Trinity, the three in one, which is really mysterious, and no one fully understands that. If they're saying they do understand that, they're selling you something or they're just plain wrong. Because it's like God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, they're all God. They all work together, They're different aspects, different personas, but not separate, right? Like that already sort of stretches a little bit um the bounds of what we can imagine. And that's kind of the point with God is that he's highly, highly personal,
Hmm.
highly, highly knowable, especially in, we have Jesus came,
Yeah.
highly, highly knowable. We come to God through Jesus, we're saved, we receive the Spirit, right? We can know God now.
Yep.
But he's also highly mysterious and still incredibly beyond us. But one of the things he seems to be is incredibly collaborative, even within himself. The Trinity is always giving and receiving within themselves,
Yep.
And so when it comes to God creating existence, making creation, making all these entities, making all these spirits, I don't think it should come as a surprise to us that God, who can absolutely could have done it all on his own,
Yeah.
I don't think it should come as a surprise to us that he creates entities that he wants to partner with him,
Yes.
serve him, um, in this sort of design, right? And that's the Elohim, like at
Hmm.
the I think at the Tower of Babel in particular, those were the ones I think they were addressing in particular. But
Hmm.
when we
Well,
talk about the sons of God being like, the nations being divvied up
yep.
according to the number of the sons of God, right? These different regents over these different nations, these different spiritual entities, and we're not 100% sure, like, technically, like, what were those, right? Like, we don't know what those were in terms of, like, you could look at a cat or a dog and know it's a cat or a dog,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So there's mystery even in like what that looks like, what they're like, all that. But their entities given domain, given authority over natural systems, weather phenomena, different areas and aspects of reality.
Hmm.
Like Baal, for example, well, he was a lot of things, but
Storm God.
he was a storm god. He was a god of increase as
Hmm.
well, and sort
Same
of
with
self-idolatry. So he went along actually later on and started gobbling up, more territory and authority and domains and taking more titles,
became
trying,
Zeus and Thor and
yeah,
yep.
trying ultimately to rival God. Um, and God wasn't having that. And then we get the passage with Elijah and the prophets of Baal. And that instance reveals something about God and something about how he treats the fallen Elohim, the fallen angels, those who have sided against him as well,
Hmm.
right? Because
Yeah.
God is not mocked.
Yep.
Elijah in that moment was mocking the prophets of Baal,
Hmm.
and that's a picture of what God does to his enemies. So even though there are demons there out there, there are fallen angels, there are these lesser gods, he's on the throne.
Yeah.
He's not mocked. He mocks his enemies. It turns it around the other way.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, like they have areas of different sort of authority and power over like different things.
Yes.
And they started going into business for themselves. A great number of them. I don't think all of them.
Well, remind me on the power thing later. I want to touch on
Okay,
that. I want to touch on that.
gotcha. And because they have authority over different natural systems, um, people could essentially exchange worship, like worship these lesser gods
There's a
and
reason why
receive
people.
something back, right?
There's a
There's
reason why
a
people
there's an
worship.
exchange there.
Yes.
And it is a tangible
Our
exchange and it's
West
a real exchange, but it's not a good idea.
our Western mind our Western mind doesn't comprehend that. We think that like, oh, these people were just worshiping the sun and like they just believed that maybe that they would get better crops one year or whatever. But the reality is like it when Paul says that Jesus disarmed them on
Mhm.
the cross, like he means they had power and now they have less power.
Yeah.
They still have influence and things, and we see that through. I'll get into this in a minute. But remind me to come back to this because I actually have a little bit of. I think this is part of why all of this stuff that we're going through is relevant for today.
Hmm.
So remind me, we'll come back to that. But let's see, Psalm 82. So
Yes.
we were talking about the sons of God that were basically regents over different nations. Okay,
Hmm.
and the words used there, they're not hostile
Hmm.
to the Lord at that point. But
Hmm.
here in Psalm 82, we see where there was a point where they became hostile to the Lord, or the
Yes.
Lord became hostile to them, rather. And it says, God has taken his place in the divine council. Now, this is that council, the divine council thing. This is like all of it is based around this idea that God does have a divine council. Like if he
Yes.
has a council of humans, if he wants to work with us, why
Yes.
wouldn't he also work with the divine?
Hmm.
And it says, God has taken his place in the divine council in the midst of the gods.
Hmm.
He holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Now, this is the Lord, Yahweh Himself,
Yes.
El Elyon, calling out
Yes.
the Elohim. Okay, it says, "How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked." They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, "You are gods, sons of the Most High.
Hmm.
All of you shall nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince.
Hmm.
Arise, O God," talking about Jesus, basically, "judge the earth, and you shall
For you
inherit all
shall
the
inherit.
nations." So, that again, we're back to that Jesus inheriting the nations, but he's talking about this, and again, our Western mindset has been that this must be talking about like human rulers.
Hmm.
It's inconsistent on a multitude of different ways. First of all, you are God's sons of the Most High. Again, I believe
Yeah.
that's a version of Benea Elohim, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong there, but
Hmm.
if I believe so. But he's saying that you shall die like men.
Hmm.
It's inconsistent to tell men that they're going to die like men. They know they're going to die like men.
Yes. So it has to be referring to something else.
Yes, and this idea of fall like any prince,
Hmm.
this is the same idea of the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece
Yes.
mentioned in the book of Daniel, and they are clearly referring to spiritual entities in those
Principalities.
yeah,
Yes.
principalities in those situations. So what we see basically take place is that the Lord, after the third fall,
Hmm.
the Tower of Babel, he he divides the people up and gives them basically their own little gods, little g
Yes.
gods. Okay,
Yes.
um, as uncomfortable as we are with that, this doesn't mean that we are saying that like this isn't
We're not saying that they should be worshipped. We're not
no.
saying they're equal to God.
And this also isn't a plural, like what's the word I'm looking
It
for? Not pluralistic.
universalism,
No.
plurality, pluritude. I don't.
When you worship multiple gods.
Oh,
Anyways, We're not saying
Oh,
because they're not on par with Yahweh, and they are like they're little g gods, but they're not like
polytheistic.
there. We're not saying
We're not
that this isn't
advocating for that.
yeah, this isn't polytheism. It's not the same as that. Polytheism, like it may like it's not even close because there is one God. But he is the Lord of Lords. He is the Lord over all
Yes.
these. He just has regions. Okay. So it's not the same thing. I know a lot of people try to say that it is. And either way, even if it was, like ultimately there is only one above them all. And he is the only one that created everything. He is the only one worth worshiping. Like Paul even says, that when he goes to, I think it's maybe Athens, I'm probably
Athens,
wrong
yeah,
here,
the unknown to
the
God.
unknown God, and he's like, hey, he doesn't say like, "Hey, these other gods aren't real." He just says, "This is the God that created everything."
Yes.
And so, even if you wanted to call this
Polytheism?
polytheism, even if you wanted to call it that, like
Yes. It's
we
not.
we completely acknowledge that the Lord is above them all, and He is the only one worthy of worship, and He is the only one that
The name above all names.
He's the name above all names, the only one that we behold ourselves to.
That
You have a thought?
Well, the name above all names also implies, I think, some of this stuff, like Lord of Lords, name above all names, that also implies something.
Yes.
That's actually, on a slightly side note, that's actually what Lucifer tried to do. He tried to write his name above the stars,
Hmm.
right? Stars meaning, the angels, names above names, all that. When he tried to usurp God. And God wasn't having that because he is the name above all names.
Yes.
Um, I think to was that the power piece that you wanted to talk about?
Oh, okay. Well, we can kind of get there slowly.
Okay.
I was going to sort of like that's all like we'll put a bow on this little piece. That's all out of the Bible. We didn't have
Yes.
to go to other texts for this. We didn't have to go to any
Didn't
other
have to go to
ideas
Enoch.
or
It
yeah.
references Enoch, ties in, but we didn't have to go there.
Yes, we haven't necessarily gone there. But all that's in the Bible, and
Mhm.
this is all Hebrew thought. If you want to just reject it. That's fine. You don't have to agree. But this is verifiably scholar approved what the Hebrews believed in the Second Temple period
Yeah.
up until the second century AD, and Christians believed until about the fourth century AD. Like this is verifiable. They believed this, and
Yeah.
again, the only reason that people don't now is because we become more increasingly naturalistic, and because of Augustine and his lack of Hebrew. And that's okay. Like I'm not like Augustine had a ton of great things to say. I'm not discounting him, but in this area I believe he was completely off. And that's okay. We're fallible. Even the
Yeah.
early church fathers were fallible. The the part that I want to touch on with Enoch is that the Second Temple period, first of all, it's referenced in Jude and one of the books of Peter.
Mhm.
And the moniker that Jesus goes by the most, Son of Man.
Mhm.
Even though it is referenced in Ezekiel and Daniel, it is most referenced in the first book of Enoch. Now,
Enoch.
when we reference Enoch, the only piece of Enoch that was pre-Jesus was First Enoch, what's called First Enoch. Second and Third
Yes.
Enoch are
A different thing.
different thing. They get confused with the First Enoch because they were all piled together.
Yes.
Those are different. But First Enoch it was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It
Yes.
is provably pre-Jesus, and there are even though scholars will not put it pre-Second Temple, there's reason to believe that it was passed down at least verbally
We know
before that.
we know Jesus referenced it, I think,
Yeah,
once or twice in the Gospels.
yeah. There's a few. I'm not totally sure about Jesus that is saying and referencing it. Again,
I thought he
he went by Son of Man. I've heard that before, but I'm not sure of it. I have heard that, but I'm not
uh
sure of it. Um,
I need to go through the Gospels again.
I've also heard that when the Mount of Transfiguration, like the words that the Lord says, you know what? Actually, he does reference it at one point. I'm remembering now. When he says, "There are in my Father's house there are many rooms," or something like that.
Mm.
Oh, if it were not so, then I would have told you. Like that
Yeah.
is referencing Enoch. I now I remember that. So
I
I'm
should
sure there's other spots.
Gotcha.
That said, it is referenced. That doesn't mean it's gospel. That doesn't mean that we take it as on par with the gospel, but clearly it influenced how the Hebrews believed
Yes.
and what they believed about things. That so back to that whole idea of demons being the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim.
Hmm.
That comes from that idea. That comes
Yeah.
from the Book of Enoch stating that when they died, that like at least a third of them, I think, or something like that, they are condemned to basically traverse the earth
Yeah.
disembodied.
And on that note, they were bastard spirits from the beginning,
Yes.
is sort of the issue. And God won't
They had no
accept
place to
them.
go.
Yeah. They didn't belong to the earth, not fully. They didn't belong to the heavens, and God wouldn't take them because they, the Watchers fell. They
Mm,
rebelled
yes.
in taking wives and birthing the Nephilim.
Yes.
So that was already like against God's will. So God wasn't going to take them. And so what they're sort of condemned to is they're condemned to wander, to not have a home,
Yes.
They're bastard spirits in the realist sense. And so Micah, that guy, had he had something he wrote down about the last of the giants,
Oh yeah, I saw
and
that.
right, and the Son of Man, Jesus, basically pre-incarnate Jesus, cursing them and saying, you will not return to my father's house.
Hmm.
Bastards you were, and bastards you shall remain. And
Which
so,
sounds harsh, but they were also super wicked.
yeah, they also like nearly consumed the entire earth. Like they were,
They
oh, a lot
killed
of
everybody.
things, cannibalistic,
Murderous.
orgiastic,
Yes.
all sorts of
They were wicked.
all sorts of crap.
Which
Um,
also, which gives credence to why the Lord would ask Israel to eliminate them, right? So
yeah,
that's a hang up for a
yeah,
lot of people when they go
yeah.
man, a loving God wouldn't. Well, actually,
There's more going on there.
when you're talking about the Rephaim, which are basically either the return of the Nephilim through epigenetics
The Rephaim, the
or a
Anakim.
second incursion
Yeah,
all
I
of
think they were called
those
the Anakim at one
all
point
those
too.
words
Yeah,
basically refer there's a bunch of those different
yeah,
words. I just usually say Rephaim because it's the easiest one for me to
yeah,
remember. But they would have had this bloodline that was insatiably wicked
yeah,
and murderous, violent, and all of the kings of those nations, especially within Canaan, were thought to be these giants, which is why Israel was like, "We want Saul because he's like them.
oh,
He's
because he's
also
taller than
super
everybody
tall."
else. Yeah,
Yeah,
gonna be in
um,
the ancient proto
yeah,
NBA. I
he's
don't know.
he's basically like on par
Um,
with them.
yeah, and just to sort of like, I don't know, flesh out a few details. Yeah, they were cast out. They were doomed to wander, doomed to for death to increase in them, right?
Mm.
And I think when you hear that God saying like, the age of all flesh is only going to be like 120 or whatever, it's cutting down the lifespan, the math's lifespan of living beings, specifically in part to address the giants,
That does make some sense, but there's also a an idea that he's actually referring to it'll be 120 years before the flood.
No, that's possible
I'm
too.
not sure which. I mean, I've heard both. But before we get
I
too deep
yeah,
into this
I
stuff,
was about to any
let
yeah.
me let me go ahead and kind of finish my train of thought because I think I got
Sorry,
off a little
yeah,
bit.
go ahead.
You're good. You're good. The idea was that there were these demons, there was this all this stuff all this to say, people believed that the Book of Enoch had credence, that they genuinely
Yeah.
leaned into the idea that it was correct about the Watchers coming down. And one of the things that I want to reference is then when Jesus goes to Caesarea Philippi, it's at the base of Mount Hermon.
Hmm.
In the Book of Enoch, Mount Hermon is where these watchers came down. They call them watchers there. They're called sons of God in the Bible. It doesn't matter. Watcher is just a title, the same way that angel is just a title. It just means angel just means messenger. It doesn't mean
Hmm.
that it's a type of being. Okay, same thing with the
It's a
watcher.
job title, a
It,
job function.
exactly. Um,
Some of which humans were messengers sometimes too for the
yes.
word. So
So the word in
it's
Anglos
used, yes,
was used for men as well.
yes.
Yes. So these fallen ones, they came down on Mount Hermon, and this is where they made their stand. And this is partially why the Tower of Babel was a ziggurat. It was basically like a pyramid kind of a thing structure because they
Hmm.
believed that it was at the high places of mountains where you could bring down gods or you could meet with gods because that's
Hmm.
generally where they would come down to. It was considered like portals and things like that, like we were mentioning earlier. The reason why that's significant is because where Jesus was in Caesarea Philippi, it was called the gates of hell. Okay,
Mm.
so when he says to Peter, the Catholics will say that this was his commissioning into being the first pope. I'm not convinced, and part of the reason is because when he says, "You are Peter, and on
Peter
this
Petrus.
rock I will build my church, and not even the gates of hell will stand against it, will prevail against it."
Hmm.
I, I actually believe, and Micheal Hieser touches on this too, is that he's actually referring to on this rock, even on this place, consider the gates of hell at the base of where my enemy set up its revolt against me. Even here on this rock,
Yes.
where the Watchers came down and covenanted themselves against me, I will build my church, and the gates of hell, which is this place, cannot prevail against it. I believe there's great credence to that. And then there's some scholars that believe that Jesus went to a different mountain for the
Mm.
transfiguration. Doesn't make a lot of
It,
sense. And
I'm not entirely sure it's fully clear where
no, but
that
it's soon
happens.
after.
Yes, but it is soon after.
Yes. And it would seem a little inconsistent for him to go, if I
Yeah,
remember right, like a long ways away for him to go from that moment to the transfiguration.
yeah.
And so there's a lot of scholars like Heiser that believe it actually would have been Mount Hermon where he
Hmm.
does it. And as Micheal Heiser said, it's sort of the proverbial shot across the bow at his enemy,
Yeah.
and it's a provocation
Throwing down the
enough.
gauntlet.
Yes, it's provocation enough to cause them to want to kill him. Okay,
Yes.
when Satan says like, "If you are the Son of God, why don't you throw yourself down from here?"
Yeah.
One of the theories is that he's actually trying to find out, can I even kill you?
Yeah.
Like, will the angel stop me from being able to kill you?
And that's a good point I just want to highlight. The enemy didn't know, Satan didn't know, none of them knew until Jesus died that
Mm-hmm.
he was who he was, that he was the Son of Man, that he was the second person of the Trinity come in the flesh
Yeah.
to bring about, you know, re redemption, restoration, and ultimately
To
resurrection for
fulfill
everyone.
the
Yeah.
prophecy that Satan or that Satan received when he
They
in the
yeah.
garden.
Yeah. And they knew they definitely knew he was a prophet, right?
Mm-hmm.
They definitely knew that he had a message and that God was using him and on him. They didn't It doesn't seem like they had the full picture of
Oh, they for sure
who
did.
or what he was, you
For
know?
sure.
Um,
Well, Paul even says like if they had known, they wouldn't have killed him.
yes.
Yeah.
I just want to highlight that
Yeah.
Satan's not all knowing, the enemy's not all knowing, the dark forces in the universe,
Exactly.
whether
Exactly.
human or angel or Elohim
Yeah.
or demon or whatever, are not all powerful, are
Mm-hmm.
not all knowing.
Exactly.
They quail at the sound of our God's voice, at
Mm-hmm.
the sound of I'm gonna go off on a thing if we keep going. Anyway,
Yeah. So to tie off one last, I think maybe one last bow before we can get into a little bit more of your experiential stuff for the last like I don't know half hour ish, if you've got that kind of time. But to tie off one last bow, I wanted to mention is this also lends credence to the seed of Satan, that
mm,
God cursed would be have enmity between man.
yes.
there is the idea that these sons of God that fell in Genesis 6 were likely provoked by Lucifer himself. And this was sort of the attempt to basically catch God in a catch 22 by polluting human DNA in such a
Yeah.
way that now there's no pure seed.
Hmm.
So when God says of Noah that he's the only one of pure seed left, or he's the only one pure, people think that he must have been the only one righteous. And while that's probably true, it also speaks to his purity of blood, his
Yeah.
DNA being pure. So that's one thing that's
Hmm.
pretty interesting is that, and it seems like to be coming back around in some ways with the transhumanism stuff that's happening. Like, can
Oh,
we?
the enemy's not that creative. He doesn't have very many new tricks.
No, but that's
No,
what I mean. Is like he's recycling his old
that's what
tricks,
I'm saying.
trying
Yeah,
to destroy human DNA. But regardless, that's another podcast.
that's a different.
The point is that I just wanted to tie off that little seed part.
Yes.
Like that would be the physicality of his seed, made
Hmm.
manifest in pre and post flood.
Yes.
Yes, awesome. So experientially,
Oh, jeez.
words.
Oh,
Well, like,
man.
so have how we've already touched on like the difference between demons and I guess Elohim or gods or whatever,
Hmm.
or deities. You know what? The power thing that you reminded me of.
Oh, yeah.
Why I think this is important for today.
Yes.
Okay. So we have, I mentioned this in a previous podcast, we are in an age that is being called post-atheism. The reason for that is because guys like Joe Rogan and such are like, hey, everybody, you should take DMT and do shrooms and do
Mm.
weed and all this other stuff so that you can experience this spiritual stuff, right?
Yes.
Now, there are a multitude of testimonies to people saying that they are encountering entities
Yes.
via psychedelics and things like that.
Yes.
So we are and people have realized that like atheism doesn't make sense, that the Darwinism doesn't make sense. Now some people move towards ancient aliens ideas, some people move towards like there's a reinvigoration of paganism. There's tons of occultism in today's
Yes.
world, New Age and all this other stuff. We are growing in this idea, and I think if we don't comprehend this part of the Bible, this
Yes.
this unseen realm thing,
Yes.
then it's going to be too easy for the church, and it has been too easy for the church to just go, "Oh, that's not a real thing," or "Oh, it's not something we should pay attention to,"
Yeah.
or "It's not really a big deal." When in reality, there's so many people in the new age today, and I think that comprehending this will help Christians to know what's going on spiritually behind these spiritual movements, because being able to, like, I guess apologetically uh describe why Jesus was real isn't as necessary today as it was 30 years ago when atheism was much more real.
Yeah.
Now our apologetics have to include why Jesus was who he said he was and
Yeah.
why these other deities that are stepping back on the scene now
Yeah.
that we're sort of also post-Christian and the light is dimmer and the darkness is spreading more, so to
Hmm.
say. I think that's why this is important.
Yeah. And I think it just remains a reality and a pattern that we see across history that the places and the areas where the church is silent, where the church doesn't address, is they're places where, you know, we surrendered, where we've lost power, where we're not being the hands and feet of God,
We
of
became
Jesus that we
lukewarm.
should be. Yeah, right. And even that, I mean, even the verse about being lukewarm, right, is
Yes.
that particular. that particular town, that particular area, it was in between hot springs and this cool mountain spring,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so when God, in the verse, when it's saying like better to be hot or cold, it means better to be,
Drinkable or
yeah,
disinfectable,
usable for like
a
to be
purpose.
one thing, to have a purpose. And that's kind of why we need to be able to speak to these areas because God does mean to work his purposes and his will in this age, in this era of an increasing awareness of other entities, of the return of the gods, of all this stuff coming back to the surface,
Hmm.
right? And so,
The church has allowed them to do so
yeah,
by abdicating its position in culture.
I, yeah. I don't actually, let's not unpack the whole history of how that happened and what
No,
happened
we
and
don't need
what,
to
but
unpack it. We just know what
yes,
happened. Yeah.
yeah, no, that's well, that's a discussion for another day because
Yes.
we can trace back the history of the church and all sorts of patterns and trends and things. But anyway, you had questions?
Yeah. So experientially,
Yes.
you've already sort of went through the difference between demons and Elohim and these sons of God and things like that. Was there
Humans, Elohim,
anything
fallen
else?
angels. Yeah.
Yeah, were there any other things that you wanted to sort of touch on within this sphere that is a little bit maybe outside of what we've, or I mean, on par with what we've spoken about, but maybe like a little different?
Um, I think I would like to say that I think really demons are really, really pitiful. They're
Hmm.
kind of pathetic, constantly miserable, not sympathetic. They're evil, right? Like, no sympathy there. But without the fear and the angst and the dark cloud, the stuff they try to slather you in or get you to agree to or attach to you, they're really, really weak, right? Like
Yep.
they're like taking out the trash or like they're like gnats.
Mhm.
So they're not nearly as strong as they want you to think,
Oh no, the amount
you
of
know?
times that I've had sleep paralysis or something,
Yeah.
and I just finally get my body to work, and I just say the name of Jesus, and they're gone.
Yeah, right. Right. And so
Like
like
I'll sort of see where they're at in the room, and then they're gone.
so when we talk about all this stuff, when we talk about the dark, when we talk about the demonic, like I really, really do just want to emphasize that God is so much more powerful than them, and they're
Yeah.
not nearly as strong as they want you to believe, right? Like whatever else you think or believe about like everything we just said, the enemy, the dark, is not as powerful, nor as looming, nor as like nowhere near as unified as they want you to think, right? I think that goes hand in hand with our sort of, I think a lot of the time we can tend to fall into, oh, it's the forces of heaven versus the forces of hell. And there's definitely like, I think a push from the occultists to make it seem like they're equal forces,
Right.
right? When in reality, no, God is so much more powerful. And like I said, like everything about the kingdom of God is alive, is life-giving, is generative, grows, is creative, in a way that the kingdom of death, the kingdom of the enemy, the kingdom of darkness cannot touch,
Hmm.
cannot match. The enemy can twist, can warp, can distort, you know, can steal, can do a lot of damage. And I'll be the first to tell you that. But at the end of the day, they're on an ever increasing ride downwards.
Hmm.
And they're not unified. The houses of the enemy aren't unified because all the fallen angels that fell, that betrayed God, that sided with Lucifer, first off, they all hate him for instigating the fall in the first place. You know, second off, they all have traitorous hearts.
Yeah.
So they're all in it for themselves. And in that, they're not united and can't be united the way that we can be potentially.
Could be.
Could
Should
be,
be.
should be, yeah. And so that's one of the that goes back to God's collaborative,
Yes.
right? God
Yes.
works in relationship,
Yep.
right? There can be no true relationship among the enemy camps, there's rivalries, there's alliances of desperation or of convenience or of the moment, but it's always fraught,
Mm.
right? And so, yeah, I think in my experience, demons really aren't nearly as powerful or nearly a threat or as nearly a problem as they want you to think,
Amen.
right? They can do real damage. There is,
Yep.
you know, real potential for mayhem or problems there, right? That is real. Not as much as the enemy wants you to think.
Yep.
They're more of a problem when they come in numbers or
Or
they
you
get
agree with them.
or you agree with them, give them a foothold, don't give them a foothold. Keep your mind sober,
Pure.
keep in the word, keep holding to Jesus, right? Stay on the rock. They're also a problem when they have they're not demons aren't even that intelligent. They're more of a problem when they have a foothold, when they have come in numbers, or when they get under the sway or leadership of something more
Bigger.
powerful,
Mm.
bigger, right? And
Like an
that's
Elohim.
where, yeah, and that's how the demons ended up like, siding with Lucifer in the first place. Lucifer needed an army, right? He didn't have nearly the
Well, and they
forces to take on God.
must have hated God for condemning
Yeah,
them to.
so it Lucifer took them under sway, right? Because the demons didn't have any home, right? They were they were cursed to, neither this world nor the heavens are their
Hmm.
home. So they're sort of cursed to be just bastards and have no, nowhere, right? So Lucifer took them under sway, and demons can be a problem when they are under the sway or directive of something more powerful,
Yes.
right? A lesser god, an Elohim, or a fallen angel. I think in terms of like threat level or power level, there's probably like a wide variety there, right?
Mm.
I think in my
I'm
experiences,
sure.
I would say fallen angels probably more powerful on average or more of a problem than the fallen of the Elohim, but the Elohim also.
What would be the difference between a fallen angel and a fallen? Are you talking about the ones that fell with Lucifer when he
Yeah,
fell
Lucifer
versus the
versus the
ones that?
regents.
Okay.
Yeah, let's just use that term because that's easier. Regents, because they're
Which
even
is kind of
it is interesting. It's
it's kind of
wild,
annoying
huh?
to think that they would have seen their brethren fall and then they were like, yeah, I'll fall to you.
I think I think they suspected or hoped or wanted to believe that
They
it
get
would
their
turn out better for them,
uh,
right?
they would get their selfish desires out of it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm not 100% sure on that one, but
We can
I think
speculate a little bit.
yeah, I think the regents were more like based in the second heaven,
Hmm.
I think the fallen angels at one point inhabited the third heaven. And I think maybe there's an importance difference there, right?
Hmm.
It certainly seems like most people probably won't deal with anything that big or heavy or that much of a problem, I think.
Right.
I think most people like aren't enough of a headache to the forces of darkness to, warrant that kind of
Most
like
people.
ye-
I know a few people
yeah.
that would warrant that though.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love those
Yeah,
people.
man.
How
Anyway, um
many times have you pissed one off?
oh God, Abba, God the Father has said to me, there is a scroll in heaven with the list of dark powers that I've pissed off. He said it's longer than most, so that's kind of gratifying. And he said that I keep adding to it.
You are a
So
man of prayer.
yeah, and that's one of the oh, we could do a whole thing on prayer.
Oh, we
I'm just
could.
thinking
Honestly, let's plan on doing it.
we should. Yeah,
Yeah.
we should.
And I'll see if I could get maybe JT on there too, because he was a big prayer guy. Like we ran the House
Good.
of Prayer in Indianapolis for a while, but I digress.
Anyway, yeah, he what was I gonna say? I don't know.
Pissing off.
Pissing off the enemy, pissing off the devil. It's shockingly not hard to do. Um,
I wouldn't be surprised. As long as you know what buttons to push. I mean, people with big egos are easy enough to piss off. I could,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
much
yeah.
less an ancient, old,
Yeah, okay,
decrepit.
hold up. Yeah, I want to point something out here. I want to point something out here. Okay, so Lucifer, so Satan, all the fallen angels, whatever. Old beyond old beyond time, millennia old, like
Yes.
older than the physical universe probably, And the physical universe is older than the young earth creationists want you to think. Let's not go there. But it's old.
There's a Timothy Alberino rabbit hole here.
Yes. Yeah, let's
But we won't go down it.
definitely
I'm just,
sidestepping
if
that.
anybody wants to go down that rabbit hole,
Anyway. Satan and his angels are immeasurably old. And they have how old are you?
uh, I'll be 35 this year, actually.
Okay. They're immeasurably old and they have beef with a 34-year-old. They're older than the universe and they have beef with a 34-year-old or a 27-year-old. And it phrase it that way, it doesn't matter what age you describe it, like, and they have beef with an 81-year-old and
And
they
they
have
have
beef with
beef
a
with a 16-year-old. Then,
16-year-old.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
Satan's not that impressive, is what I'm saying. The powers of
Amen.
darkness are not that impressive.
Listen up,
Um,
Masons. He's not that impressive.
they do become a problem and a headache, especially
Yes.
when you start talking about principalities and territories and
But all things
what
are,
can be entrenched in sort of geographic
yes.
areas or sort of systems. They get a hold of systems a lot,
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
because
Our legal
part,
system,
yeah, well,
our political
yeah.
system,
I
our
mean,
church
even
system in a
even
lot of ways.
just like, oh yeah, that too. Even just like, right, like I said, Baal's one of the gods of increase, right? Like that's one of his domains.
Hmm.
He is increase, self-exaltation, idolatry, also a bringer of chaos, a storm god,
Yep.
right? Sounds like the US, anyone? They we should also maybe do an episode on altars,
Sure.
on worship and sort of how that goes. But one of the things he's in charge of is increase, right? People look for increase all the time in all sorts of ways. And so when that's gets grabbed a hold of by him or creatures like him or entities like him, that's when like things like increase, that's when good things can turn bad,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah. Yep.
And so I think where I want to point to is that go to God with f- for everything and with everything and to everything, right? How does the worship first go? From God all things, to God all things. He deserves the glory,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And that I think I really want to emphasize because, you know, the powers of darkness don't have anything on God.
Mm-mm.
And really, he is the only one worth worshiping. He's the only one worthy. The entirety of existence itself
Mm.
is upheld by him and sings praises to him. There's a sort of ancient Hebrew idea that the entirety of existence is upheld by the hum, the buzzing of God's voice, of his exhale, right? And that can, maybe get into frequencies and maybe get into different things and whatever.
You knew where my brain
But
was.
yeah, and I knew where you go. But it's quite interesting, right? Because it's only like, you know, centuries and millennia later that we discover like, oh, reality is composed of these things we call molecules, which are composed of these things called atoms, which are composed of these things called subatomic particles, and all of those things are wildly moving at once,
Vibrating.
right? Vibrating, moving. And so in a roundabout way, it does sort of point to and confirm that the entirety of creation, the entirety of existence is upheld by the sound of God's voice, by the
Yes.
hum of his breath, by the breathing out.
Let there be.
And in that way, it's a picture, right, of the verse, like, you know, um, the stars sing praises to God. They speak his name, the rocks beneath our feet. Jesus, I think when he was making his triumphal entry, they tried to tell tell him to tell the people to stop, singing Hosanna, all that. And he said if they didn't sing that, if they didn't say that, the rocks beneath you would sing that,
And they do.
right? And they do. They're around us, says that. Every cell in our body, every
It's all frequency,
molecule,
which is sound.
it's all singing and praising God.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've missed out on, right? Like, believe the universe is full of spirits or not. What we've missed out on is a lot of wonder, right? Day-to-day wonder. We've lost a sense, a tangible sense of good. The
Hmm.
Hebrew perception of good wasn't this moralistic, abstract sort of good. It was felt good, the good that you encountered, the good of a full belly after a long day, of a spot by the fire with your loved ones, of a warm place in the middle of a cold and wet night, or a sunrise after after a long dark night. I've had some long dark nights,
Hmm.
and there is a way of like when the sun rises, it pits you up, it makes things better, right? And that's a picture of God's mercy and grace, of his love and the detail and the craftsmanship that he put into creation.
Yeah.
We have lost the sense, I think the biblical sense of felt good because it's never a moralistic finger wagging sort of good.
Yeah.
It really is that when the Bible talks about good, it's like this is right in front of you,
Yeah.
right? One of the verses, I think I want to say it's in Psalms or Proverbs. It says something to the effect of, lead me in the good way, show me the ancient way,
Mm.
show me where the good way lies. And that really is like this good that comes to you, right? How many times do they refer to like wisdom, like get wisdom, because it'll be health to your flesh and strength to your bones,
Yeah.
right? There is a sort of a spiritual and metaphorical sort of like picture in there, but there's also something real and tangible and in front of us in terms of get wisdom because it's better for you and
Yep.
you'll live longer and you'll live a better quality of life and you'll be healthier because you'll
Yep.
be doing wise things and not dumb things.
Yep.
And this goes hand in hand with I think a biblical sort of idea of peace as well,
Mm.
right? Because shalom, that's what peace is. Shalom, it's a lot of things, it's several things. Hebrew people were very comfortable. Their perspective, their mindset were very, very comfortable with both and sort of mystery and sort of allowing things to be multiple things at once, allowing the nuance and allowing sort of God to work things out. And so shalom, it means several different things at once, is right? It's the peace that makes things complete,
Yes.
right? It's the peace brought out of order or the peace that brings things into order out of chaos.
Yeah.
It's also nothing good withheld,
Mm.
right? Tangible good, real good. And so we get an idea of like how goodness is really like itself something that points to and speaks to God.
Yep.
And there's goodness all around us. We're just on our phones and distracted and, not paying attention and too stuck in our own thoughts to realize it. The world is colorful, the world is deep. And I think that we should be cultivating different religions and belief systems get this a lot better, but we should be cultivating presence and
Mm.
imagination and gratitude for the things and the goodness given to us, for the beauty all around us.
Give thanks in all things.
Yeah, it's there for a reason.
Yep.
It's written down for a reason. In that we've made God smaller than he is,
Yeah.
and that's a problem. And believe us or not about Deuteronomy 32, about the sons of God and the Elohim and whatever, it does point to God's a little bit beyond us. He's bigger than us. He's loves us. He's intimately knowable by us.
Yep.
But he's also mysterious, and there's always going to be more of him to know,
And there's
right?
so much more that's interesting and impressive and awesome. Like this doesn't just. make me go, oh, this is like for me, I don't look at this and go, oh, I should be scared of the bad guys at all. I go, whoa, the intricacy at
Mm,
which the Lord actually did things goes way over what I
yeah,
learned in church.
yeah,
Because what I learned in church was amazing, but oh my gosh, you're telling me that there's these fallen angels that slept with women that created giants that were like
hmm,
killing everybody. And then God was like, I'm going to do away with you, not once, but again in the Canaanite land
yeah,
and all this other stuff. And
yeah, yeah,
then, oh, the devil isn't just trying to tempt us. He's actually trying to take us out. And yeah, we know he's here to steal, kill, and destroy, but like
yeah,
he's actually trying to completely manipulate us into no longer having the image of God in us in our DNA and all this other stuff. Like it's actually that intricate and it's
hmm,
that impressive and God's actually like yeah, I know God is in control and whatever. He's in control of all of that too. Like holy crap.
yeah. It's
And he uses it all for my good, for the good of those that love him.
yeah, he's great. Yeah, we would. I think we would be woken up. I think we would. The church would lose a lot of its sort of passivity and complacency if we cultivated more joy, more wonder, more imagination.
Mm,
God can work in our imagination. God can work in us and through us, you know. Oh, out of the mouth of babes, right? Takes childlike faith to step into the kingdom. That means that means wonder. That means joy. That means seeing beauty and play and these different, I don't know,
perspectives.
different perspectives. Greater things, simpler things, smaller things, right? Joy and wonder, um, love and awe, you know, like
Yeah.
they should all run hand in hand. And in that, that's another picture of good. And it is the goodness of God that is the vehicle to convey to us the glory of God.
Yes.
The glory of God is the revelation of his holiness, right? That he alone is set apart, that he alone is holy, that he's totally this other thing beyond us, right? Glory is the revelation of
Mm,
that holiness. And so that's conveyed to us by goodness, by felt
mhm.
this felt and experiential goodness. So we shouldn't be asleep in the pews. We shouldn't be like, you know, overly moralistic or moralizing. We shouldn't be, you know, overly intellectualizing things. We should be living like life in all of its facets and domains and taking all of that to God.
Yeah.
From God all things, to God all things.
There's an ancient Orthodox idea, Orthodox Christian idea that if you seek beauty, you'll find truth.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's just so
That's what you're saying.
engraved into it's right before us and we miss it. And I don't know how, but we miss it. And that's the sad thing, that the beauty of God is all around us and we
Hmm.
blink, right? Even even some of the even some of the philosophers and people from the world got that. That was one of the things Nietzsche said. And the last man blinked, right? He makes everything small, right? He doesn't understand the wonder all around him. And that exemplifies probably more of us than not.
Hmm.
It's I think one of the frustrations. Like if we want to speak just real quick to the humanity of Jesus, because Jesus was fully God and fully man, which means, you know, there's humanity in him too. To speak to the frustration of Jesus, he got frustrated when, you know, this is right in front of you. You Pharisees, you blind leaders of the blind, it's right in front of you and you're not seeing it. And these children are rejoicing and singing in the streets. You know, people are being healed and made well. You know, lives are being restored, relationships, friendships, family, marriages, all this, they're being restored. The poor have the good news preached to them, the gospel, the resurrection of the dead. Like, it's all
Yeah.
Jesus is. giving it all,
Yeah.
giving it all away for anyone who wants it. We haven't changed in 2,000 years, you know?
Yep. But it's
We
through
still
this.
miss it.
It's through this.
Mhm.
Well, the Bible. But I think it's also through this supernatural worldview
Yeah.
that we're going to see so many New Agers and occultists and other things saved because they're going to recognize the Lord for who He is
There,
and not for the small
yes.
box that we put Him in.
Yeah. And it's in an odd sort of way. Maybe it will be like beauty that leads them to restoration, you know, beauty that leads them to the
Yep.
salvation of their souls, right? Because they're looking. There are a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people today that
Looking for
are
truth.
are looking for truth and looking for like more.
Yep.
How much of us we live we're all I think most of us we're all kind of feeling it to some degree. Like
Oh yeah.
we live, you know, paycheck to paycheck. We scrape by. We eat food we know isn't good for us that doesn't really fully leave us satisfied. We're so distracted and scattered, somewhat by design. That's a different topic. We're so distracted and scattered, looking at our phones, looking at our screens. You know, we've lost the art of so many different things, but human connection, human relationship, we've lost so many of the things that make life good.
Yep.
And we all feel that, and a lot of people complain about that. And it's this creeping sort of boredom and banality that is doing us in, you know? I think there are a number of people, a lot of people, that might wish, you know what, I feel this sense of dread, this sense of exhaustion, this sense of worn out. I wish there was some big evil opponent that we could just one and done defeat, you know? At least it'd be in front of us, at least it'd be done, you know?
Uh-huh.
But it's just like they said this after in the trials after World War II.
Nuremberg.
Yep, I think.
Yep.
Don't quote me on this. One of the people there said, "Evil is banal. It's it's banal. It's thin. It creeps over the surface of the earth, but it has no depth to it." And it
Goodness does.
it does. Beauty does. Shalom, peace does. God does, because He conveys us all these things, and He invites us into a deeper and a truer life with Him.
Yep.
That's the gospel in a nutshell, anyway. Might as well squeeze that in, but I think, yeah, I think I'm good.
Yeah. Dope. Well, dude, thanks for coming back
Yeah,
for another one. We'll definitely have to talk on some other topics in the
absolutely,
future.
absolutely.
Yeah, man. Love you, dude.
I love you too, man.
All right, well, that's the podcast, guys. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time.